The Kitchen is based off the DC Vertigo graphic novel of the same name. When three housewives' husbands are sent to prison for 4 years, they decide to take over organized crime in 70s Hell's Kitchen in order to pay their bills. So I went into this film basically unfamiliar with the graphic novel itself, but very intrigued with the idea of Melissa McCarthy and Tiffany Haddish kind of doing a more serious turn with this film. Before I give you my take on it, be sure to tell me what you thought about it down below in the comment section, especially if you're familiar with the source material. I would love to have someone's take on the film that has actually read the comic book series. With that said, let's get started talking about the good. In kicking things off, I thought the ladies did a really nice job here. In particular, Tiffany Haddish, I've only seen her in more comedic roles where she's usually playing kind of the over-the-top character. And here, I was able to buy her as this personality that very clearly has a longing for power that's highly manipulative. All of it worked for me. Melissa McCarthy, I think, had a few more moments where I had a little trouble buying into it because she seemed she could play the mom a little bit too well. And in certain sequences, I just saw the mom far more than I could see the harsh side to the character, that she needed to be both of those, and I didn't see the bridge quite as much. But for the most part, I still even bought Melissa McCarthy inside of the role. And speaking of the harsh side, this movie doesn't really pull punches. They are leading the organized crime inside of this community, and so they're doing hits. They are being very shrewd towards people. They're doing some cruel things. They're not trying to do this softened down version of it. You see some violent things inside of the film that are harsh and put them in a very negative light, but it fits perfectly into this genre where people do really bad things. The movie also has a sense of humor inside of it. Naturally, when you kind of have two of your leads are known for being in comedies, you're gonna get a touch of that inside of the film. And I felt it was organic. I've heard some people say it felt a little bit forced or tonally uneven. For me, it worked because the way the humor was incorporated, it felt like we were seeing organic moments where funny people said funny things, or the scenario lent itself to a little bit of a joke. It didn't feel like big setups. It wasn't Melissa McCarthy tripping and falling over into trash cans or something like that, so it worked for me. And finally, the most interesting thing about this film is that it is kind of this genre that we've seen before, but we're seeing it from the perspective of women. We're seeing the story, how would they run organized crime? So it has a very different flavor to it, and the way certain scenarios kind of play out, the way they interact with one another, and certainly the way that the men in the community treat them. It has a very different vibe for being a story that we've seen before. With that said, let's move on to the bad. And the problem here is what I just mentioned, is that we have seen this before. It's a very familiar mob, organized crime type story of these people that decide to take over and kind of their rise to the fame, the competing value sets, the manipulation where they start to turn on each other. It's all the stuff that you see in movies like this, just with women. And if you remove that aspect, it's kind of just a generic mob movie. Also, for the amount of story that they're telling that covers, I think like a year and a half passes in the span of the film, and you're watching kind of their rise to power, the movie's only about an hour and 40 minutes of story time inside of it. I was out of the theater in under 2 hours, and the movie started a little bit late. Everything plays out just kind of very matter of fact. It just tells us, and it just happens. We don't dig deep into it. We don't explore the deeper aspects because there's just not enough runtime on the film to allow that to happen. There's also some very strange storytelling choices inside of the film, like the introduction of the Domhnall Gleeson character. The way they did it, I think, undermined both his introduction as well as the scenario that was taking place at the moment that he's introduced. And it seemed like they were trying to do something really dramatic by the way they kind of incorporated these two things together, but I just don't think it worked for either one of these things. There's also kind of a big twist around the second to third act transition inside of the film that wasn't set up at all. Like, it's a pretty major kind of reveal inside of the film, but it's not set up to be a mystery. You're not wondering about what was going on. It's just like, and this was really happening at the same time. And so some of these choices, it just seemed like they weren't handled the best that they could have been. I think a lot of that goes back to the writer-director here has a long history as a writer, but this is their first directorial effort, and I think you see a little bit of that inside of some of the storytelling and how the pieces kind of fit together, because in general, I think the movie should have been more impactful than it was, but a lot of it just fell flat because of the way the pieces were put together. The most egregious example example of this inside of the film is that it tries to do a lot of kind of female empowerment moments inside of the film. Certainly my audience took it that way. And it chooses a lot of really bad times and scenes to do that, as these women aren't doing good things. They're behaving in a manner that if a man did this inside of a movie like this, it would be toxic masculinity. It's criminal behavior. It's manipulative. It's evil what they're doing. But the movie tries to play it as female empowerment. And so it just doesn't quite work right with what they're going towards. And at the end of the day, it makes these women very unlikable because things that they do inside this film, a man does not do these sorts of things in mob films. They do some things that are worse than what men do in organized crime films, and that makes the film kind of leave you with a little bit of a bad taste inside of your mouth. Overall, it's not really a bad film. It just kind of falls into that mediocre middle. The memorable thing about it is that it's a female-led organized crime film, but even with the female messaging inside of it, there's some pretty big problems. Overall, it's a C+. It's a 5.5 on the entertainment scale. I don't really recommend this film. If you're interested in it, just rent it from Redbox. If you've enjoyed this review, check out that playlist right over there. It's got all my other 2019 movie reviews. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.